Hi, this week we've seen in Kenya a whole bunch of by-elections all the way from Ukambani in the east through the Rift Valley and up into Western Kenya. Now, apart from probably just the ones in Ukambani, there has been one defining feature about the elections this week, and that has been the violence that has marred those elections. In today's Twizy, we will be looking at why weak punishments for election crimes bodes ill for Kenya's democracy. Hi, and welcome to Twizy TV. This is where we discuss topical events and current affairs that matter to Kenyans. This is the show where we discuss what is going on in the country as it is going on and analyze it to see what impact it has for you and for me. If you like the content that we produce on Twizy TV, we welcome you to subscribe to our content below and to give us your comments and tell us what you think about the content that we're producing and about what is going on in the country. Welcome to Twizy TV, and this week we are going to be talking about why weak punishments for election crimes bodes ill for Kenya's democracy. Political violence is nothing new in Kenya. We've had it here ever since we became an independent country in 1963, and for that matter, it occurs everywhere around the world. Where you have political contest so that people are competing for resources, for power, for influence, you are going to have conflict. And that conflict is resolved many times through violence. Now, that is not to justify the violence, it's just an explanation as to why electoral and election violence is common. The problem, though, is that for a young democracy, a young political entity jurisdiction such as Kenya, political violence is an existential threat. Political violence that is not controlled, not managed, will eventually lead to the breakup of the country as we know it. And this is why it is important that we address this issue and understand where it comes from, what we can do to control it, and how to manage electoral violence in a situation where there is political conflict and competition for resources and for power. This week, in by-elections that have happened across the country, we have seen examples of election malpractice, including violence, that have marred the elections. It is not an exaggeration to say that the elections that we have witnessed in Kenya this week have not been free and fair. They have not been free and fair to the people who won, and they have not been free and fair to the people who lost, because the environment in which they were held was not itself free and fair. In the by-elections that we witnessed in the Rift Valley and in Western Kenya this week, we saw examples of election crimes and malpractice that ranged all the way from actual physical assaults through to bribery with people, bribing the voters at the polling stations with cash, people being caught in public with gruesome weapons, including knives and iron bars, intending to intimidate their opponents. All this happened, and we saw it on social media and we saw it on the news. That kind of environment cannot be deemed to have been free and fair. It must be seen in the context of intimidating the people who participated in the elections as contestants, as well as those who went to the polling stations in order to support their candidates. The kind of things that we have witnessed this week have a pedigree that goes back to the elections of 2017, when we witnessed the country being held to ransom and blackmail by those who had not won in the elections of that year. We have a situation that is akin to anarchy that comes about every electoral cycle, and in between that, in the by-elections, where those who feel aggrieved for one reason or another, instead of resorting to the rule of law, decide to take the law into their own hands and therefore create instability, which results in the violence. Well, who are these people who are committing these election crimes? This week in the Rift and in Western Kenya, we saw a whole range of people, from party political agents to IEBC officials at work, through to the police themselves, who were on occasion caught on camera intimidating certain people. And we even had people bribing voters as they were in the queues with cash in order to make them vote one way or the other. All of these are examples of the political violence that we are talking about at elections. The who of election crimes is important, but it is more important to understand why people engage in election crimes. And in Kenya, the why can be classified under three main titles. The first of these is resource management and resource control. Politics is about controlling and leveraging the resources within the country. Now, those resources can be a whole range of things, not just the natural resources, but also people resources. And your control, your ability to manage those resources comes from your ability to control the political space. Fighting in order to control that political space is a way that has been used since politics was invented by mankind in order to control the resources. This is why in Kenya, which is resource limited, political operatives engage in election crimes in order to control and manage the resources. Now, the second reason why people engage in election crimes is for the raw power itself. The raw power allows individuals and groups of individuals to impose their will, their vision, and their authority on a country. This is outside the resource question. This is about having a vision about where you think the country needs to be headed. This is about having a perspective about what this country is all about. The way you impose that vision, that perspective on a country is through political power, and you gain that political power at the ballot box, and that often leads to conflict with people who do not share your vision and your perspective, and therefore you resort to election crimes. This is what happens, and this is what we have seen happening in the elections this week. A third and particularly peculiar reason for election violence in Kenya is where you have multi-party democracies in an ethnically diverse population, so that the political parties themselves become fragmented and representative of the ethnicities rather than ideologies. Now, when you have a multitude of democratic parties contesting for a limited number of power and resource leverage seats in parliament and at the county levels, you are going to have conflict. And that conflict is often resolved, again, as we saw in the Rift and in Western Kenya, through election crimes, including violence. So we have three things that lead and contribute to election crimes in Kenya, and those are the power, the resources, and the multiple ethnicity democratic structures that we have in the country. So now we understand who is engaging in the election crimes. We understand why they're doing it. And now let's look at what we can do to manage the situation so that they stop doing it, or at least we alleviate the harmful effects of such election crimes. The problem in Kenya with election crimes, whether they be bribery or violence, is not a lack of laws. We have the laws. We have the statute that sets the crime and the punishment for the crime. The problem is lack of enforcement. The laws exist, but they need to be enforced, and they need to be enforced by the state through its agencies of the police and the prosecutors and the judicial system, so that people who engage in election crimes know that they will face the consequences of those crimes at some point and for certain. At the moment in Kenya, and going back to 2018, when there was a parallel swearing in of an illegal government after the 2017 elections, nobody is held accountable for election malpractice. That is the problem. That is where it is. That is where things go wrong. We need to have a state that enforces its own laws to make sure that people who engage in election crime are made to face the full law. A failure by the state to address the question of election violence and malpractice is bound to bring the electoral practices and democratic system of governance in this country into disrepute with the citizens and the voters. And once that happens, you then have an existential threat to the country as we know it, because it can very quickly become ungovernable because people are not being held accountable for their election crimes. So the question becomes, why is the state in Kenya seemingly reluctant to address election crimes all the way back from 2018 and even before that through to now in 2021? What is the problem? This, as a citizen, is the key question. Why is the government of Kenya not taking action against people who have been clearly caught in election crimes and malpractice? We need an explanation from the government, and more than that, we also need to see them taking firm action so that the kind of events that we witnessed in the Rift Valley and in Western Kenya this last week are not repeated, and where they are repeated by people who do not take account of the law, they are treated to the full effects of the law, including prison and jail time. So the question that we need answers to from the Kenyan government is, why are they not applying the laws that we have in this country in order to manage election crimes? It's that simple. We need to understand why the laws are not applied, or if they are, why they are applied in a manner that does not make them effective to deter other people from committing the same crimes every single time we go into elections, at the general election, or for that matter, in by-elections as we've had this past week. We need these answers so that we, as citizens, can start growing more confident that the election system and the democratic arrangements that we have in Kenya are being managed and controlled properly through the laws in order to stop those people who would undermine them through election crimes for their own ambitions and their own objectives. That is what we need to understand. Today's topic on Twizy has been all about election crimes in Kenya. Who does them, why, and what we can do about it, because unless we do something about it, we are going to have a problem. Please give us your comments below and tell us what you think. How can we better address the election issues that we see every single time we as citizens go to the polls? What are your views? Let us know. Thank you for watching.